which I've now done. So welcome everyone. We are now recording. As you hopefully saw from my email, the sort of theme for the call today, we'll start by just having a discussion on the user requirements document as that's developing on the shiny new ADD GitHub. Those of you looking at the ADD mailing list will have seen some references to this over the last few days, with some suggestions for additional input from various people. I asked Chris if he wouldn't mind perhaps just leading the discussion, perhaps just to sort of share his thoughts on what's currently on there and how he sees it developing, and then others can sort of chip in, and we'll see where the discussion takes us. So with that in mind, Chris,
okay.
You're still on, do you want to just kick off, give a few thoughts, and as I say, we'll see where this
Sure.
this
Let
leads.
me share so we can see what we're talking about. Right, so can you see that okay?
Yep.
Yeah, excellent. So this is essentially it's a skeleton at the moment, but it's my suggestion for how we can document the group's requirements. So at the moment, it's just been pulled together from what people have posted on the list in terms of what they would like to see and focus on. So I've tried to draw that up. Now, this is not, of course, this is not the only way it could be structured. So I am asking for input on that point particularly. But the way I've got it here is, if you skip past the intro, so there are two main sections. So you've got section 3, which is discovery of associated resolvers. And associated is quite a general term, but you can think of it as, in a more simple way, as discovering the encrypted DNS service of an existing resolver. So you already know how to talk to an unencrypted resolver. How do I talk to the encrypted version of that resolver, or one that is very similar to it, run by the same entity, does similar things, that kind of thing. And there are 3 subsections within that. So you've got the resolver declared by the network that you're already talking to. You've got the resolvers that you have configured, or whoever set up your computer has configured, because they're expecting you to use some other DNS resolver. Now, generally, that some other DNS resolver is port 53. We want to discover how do we talk to the same resolver but in an encrypted way. And the third subtype of this is discovering resolvers associated with a VPN. And it's the same case where the VPN says, while you're connected to me, here's the DNS resolver IP. Generally, that's port 53. And yes, it will go through the encrypted tunnel, but there are cases where it's nice to be able to learn how do you do dot or do through that.
Just quick interrupt there.
You can, Jim?
Should there also be a case here for discovering the resolver through a captive portal?
Sorry, Jim, I didn't quite hear you.
Sorry, discovering the resolver through a captive portal.
A captive portal is, it's certainly, yes, a critical case, and I think that really comes under walled garden content.
Yeah.
I mean, it's true to say that generally the captive portal is declared by the attached network. So you've got that case there where you want to know, how do I talk to that captive portal in an encrypted way? But you've also got the case where maybe you only want to talk to that captive portal resolver if you really have to. And
Yeah, I'm thinking of a scenario, say in a coffee shop where you speak to the captive portal, type in the magic password, and then you're presented with the choice of DNS services. Do you want to use node? Do you want to use dots? Do you want to have filtering? Do you not? Is filtering mandatory?
Mm-hmm. So the way I think about that is yes, you need to discover what's available from that local network, and that's not just going to be one answer. That could be a set of answers using different protocols with different filtering. And this first case could tell you all of that, but what you also need section 4 for is to learn about particular names that are generally only discoverable through a particular resolver. So this could be anything .mcdonald's may not be resolvable in the public internet, but is through the McDonald's DNS server, and so you need some way of learning that the names that are applicable there, should you want to talk to them. Do you think that covers it, Jim? With that,
I'm not really sure, but let's just carry on and go through the document, Chris. So we don't want to too bogged down in detail here.
Sure. Okay.
I think we just have to recognise we'll have to put some text in about captive portals, and the question might be is where and how do we do that? That's enough, I think, for now. I'm just thinking that might be another use case that needs to be documented.
It's be good to see some text from you, Jim.
I knew you were going to see that, Chris.
Right, so I was saying, backing up a bit, section 3 is discovery of associated resolvers. And section 4 is discovery of limited domain resolvers. So that's best understood, I think, by looking at the examples. So you've got mapping between a locally hosted domain and a resolver, of which there are subtypes. So walled garden is one type. Locally cached content is an interesting one, particularly useful when you've got an ISP that has a big CDN cache deployment, and if the method of selecting the edge node is DNS, then there are a number of ways you can do that, but it can be important in terms of traffic engineering and in terms of performance to be able to get the most local content. And the last one is private enterprise names, and that's in the case of so there could be something .company, or any corporate internal network will generally have names that are only visible on that network, and so you need some way of learning how do I look up those, and if when you're on the corporate network you're only using corporate DNS, that's fine. But if you're using a mixture, sometimes you're using corporate services, sometimes you're using external internet names, then this is where this becomes particularly useful.
Hey, Chris, Glenn here. You got a question around that one?
Yeah.
Do we anticipate, or do we think there is a requirement to avoid leakage of those internal names, if possible, as part of this?
Well, that generally is a requirement, isn't it?
Yeah.
How do you think that would? How would that appear here, though?
I think we need another one here, Chris, for split DNS as opposed to private enterprise names.
Mm-hmm.
So you can have in an enterprise network, let's say hypothetically bt.com is configured this way. Is there's an internal version of bt.com that you only see inside that network that you're employing. And that's different from the case of a private enterprise name where a company's picked a domain name like .intra and anchored all the internal namespace under that.
Yeah, you're right. Those are two very different cases, aren't they? Yes, we'll need both of those.
Yeah, I think. Well, I think maybe to answer your question, how do we deal with it? I think maybe we create a section, write it down, and then fold it back. I mean, if it can ultimately be folded back into these more generic cases, that's really great. And maybe, but for now, what if we create a subsection here about these private and leakage names, and then we can reference that requirement from these various places where they might occur, right? Yes. So I'm on a fully open internet with a fully open client on the open internet. It's not as much of a concern as if I'm coming off of a private network or locally cached stuff, or as Jim described, his environment, or the BT environment.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll add another section in here, I think. So yeah, within discovery of limited domain resolvers, we've talked about that mapping between a domain. There is also discovering a mapping between a public domain and a resolver, which is classically the original adaptive DNS proposal had this, which is where a CDN can say, or any domain, but generally its most relevance for CDNs is the CDN says anytime you want to look up an address for one of these names, then come talk to me, because I'm the one who serves the authoritative answer anyway, and I'll give you the and obviously the privacy benefit knows about it, only the two parties, but there are issues that then result from that.
Just to take note, downside.
Yeah, this one's going to be controversial.
Yep.
And also even the subtle point of, should it be, is it required to be the authoritative server, or can you direct them to a non-authoritative server that you prefer to do business with?
Yes.
So it's a question which may be my ignorance, but is this fundamentally a new feature, or is this something that's already theoretically possible?
iOS 14 does it.
No, I mean, currently in the DNS, we have sort of recursive resolvers, we have forwarders, and we have authoritative server. This is an intermediate between sort of a resolver and authoritative domain. And I think it complicates the system as a whole, and it makes it hard to deliver sort of, unless you have really some controls in place, it makes it hard to use DNS as a control plane going forward.
Yeah,
it does, yes.
Because some people seem to come into this problem with the assumption that this is a hard requirement, and other people can't really understand the use case for it. Or at least if they do understand the use case, they think the risks/rewards are not very well balanced.
Well, and Ian, a lot of people have also raised the concern that this, if misapplied or applied in a particular way, misapplied implies judgment. Applied in a particular way could actually increase the fragmentation of the DNS globally.
It's a mild way of putting it.
I've been told I'm not supposed to use the word balkanize anymore, because that's offensive. So I need a new word that says, something like that. That it also implies, it's terrible to do this. So risky.
So what I'm thinking of doing here is documenting all those issues. So we can say the narrative and the requirements table can say, yeah, here is the general requirement. It would be useful for some parties to be able to do this. This is how this is what they would gain by doing it. Here are all the issues it would then means, and those are other requirements. Well, I'm not really sure how it will look out, but my general aim is just then in this section somewhere it needs to articulate all these issues that many of you have commented on.
It does, Chris. I think that's the right way to approach it, because ultimately we're going to have to sort of go through this at a, like a consensus level, right? Because the whole purpose of getting these requirements written down was so that the ADD group could come to consensus on what the requirements were. And I anticipate this will be one of the most controversial ones in the list.
I think you're right though, Glenn. The key thing is to capture them all first and then go through and agree what actually stays as an actual requirement.
Yes.
Yes, I tend to agree with that. Go ahead, Glenn.
Well, I was going to say, you know, in terms of, since we recognize this will be contentious, in fact, that probably drives us to in fact, over collect and over focus on collecting stuff here, because in order for us to evaluate and to make a good decision on whether it goes in or not and what pieces of it go in or not, we need all the facts we can get.
Yes.
I see Zaid has posted a question on the chat. Does it help adding a mapping criteria subsection to section 4.2?
A mapping criteria subsection. Can you explain?
Chris, do your delegation thing. Zaid, contribute text.
Sorry, is my mic working? I was having a
Yes.
hard time earlier. Okay, great. Yeah, I just in order to maybe divide up the space of contentions, we could. I was thinking if there is a criteria behind mapping, if those can be listed, then you can discover based on that criteria of mapping. So right now, because I as I listened, there was opinions on this in terms of whether service is popular or size or performance or what have you. So if we, I thought it may help if we just list what mapping criteria are to map against versus just leaving it open like that. Thanks. I hope this helps.
So what would be an example of a criterion then?
There's like, for example, performance comes to mind as a criteria. I could have two different public domains or, you know, like public resolvers, if you will. Size could be a criteria. So, you know, would I want to join what I perceive, for example, a more reliable provider versus public provider versus less one? So if I had a provider that has, you know, maybe, and I'm just kind of out of my, you know, out of thin air, but if it had, for example, just one user, right, and it had 4 stars in terms of rating. So would I want to go with that, thinking I will get low volume versus someone that's heavy but it's got more, less of a, if you will, rating?
So is this part of the client's decision process about whether they want to follow this mapping?
Correct.
Okay.
I imagine it would be, bless you.
Yeah, the ADD draft, the adaptive DNS draft had a whole section on how the kind of mapping would be done. And I think if we really include something like the public domain mapping, we'll have to provide something similar here.
So at the moment, the requirements, I think, Chris, are mainly focused on discovery rather than selection. But presumably, well, did you envisage this document covering both or focusing purely on discovery?
So I was, yeah, Glenn, intervene if you think differently. So I was thinking that the discovery process should also include the necessary information being delivered to the client so that they can make an informed selection decision.
I don't see a problem with including it, Chris. So
yeah.
to answer your thing, the worst thing is, let's say we include it, and then at some point it blossoms into a much bigger thing that we need to break out. We can always just break it out.
Okay. Yes. Because in many of these cases, you're not just discovering the fact that resolver exists, you're also discovering some metadata about that resolver, for example, which domains it claims to know about. So it is supplying information that is useful in a selection decision. So that's the main part of the document, and then I have a section that gathers all the requirements. So each of these had their own requirements table with a numbered requirement, and then for easy reference, those are then collected together in one place. Refer to it more easily. Is anyone going to speak then? So just to give you an insight, this is what the original Markdown looks like. So it's very simple, very easy to add text, even into the requirements table. So you just copy and paste to add more words or more requirements. So hopefully it should be pretty easy for people to contribute to that.
So just for a process perspective, so you'll sort of generate a pull request for the MD, and then the rest is automatically generated?
It can be automatically generated. Currently it's me, but yeah, I need to run the necessary commands to automatically generate the HTML output.
Well, you need to approve the pull request anyway, I guess.
Yeah, so yeah, there's two steps, isn't there? So there is the process of how do we get changes to the Markdown put into the GitHub, and there is the process of how do you export that as a new editor's draft. So I was answering the latter part, which is how do you do that bit using the tooling. The previous bit is probably the more interesting one, which is how do people contribute to this? So if you're able to, yes, I would recommend engaging with a GitHub, either raising an issue or submitting a pull request.
So on the issues thing, go on here, let me chime in. I think, and we'll see this coming weekend if it worked, I've enabled automatic mailing weekly of the activity within the repository to people who subscribe to it. So if you're interested, this should enable you, and I believe that's done through the watch link up in the top right hand. When you're logging to GitHub, there's a watch button you can push. I've turned a feature on that is being used over in other groups. And so it said it worked. And so I guess, I think it's on Sundays, it sends out the automated list of all open issues and things that have been closed in the past week, as well as pull requests that have been accepted. And so that should help in terms of tracking what's going on. And inside the issues thing, if you've done work in any other place, so if you click on issues there, when you go to new issue over on the right hand side, Chris, just click there. There is a bunch of pre-configured tags. If you click, so on the right hand side it says labels, and then if you just click on there, there's a bunch of labels that have been set up to help, and they're specifically focused around the IETF process, so that you can contribute issues here against the document, and say, hey, I think you should just, and so this could include things like text, if you have just like a specific clarification on text in the issues comment. What I've seen work successfully in other groups is if you keep your issues very focused, like don't like make a broad issue that says, your document needs the following 15 sections changed in the following ways. That is a pull request. Don't do it as an issue. But if you believe it's got a couple of issues, do specific issues around each individual item. That way they get to be tracked. And so if you think that Chris needs a better list in section 4.6, and you have a suggestion on that list, put that in section 4.6, list needs the following modifications, or even maybe just the following line added to it. And then that can be tracked and managed by the group, and we can discuss it. And so if you think he's got something wrong in section 3, or he needs something new in section 3, create a second issue for that. And as you see here, there's ways around documentation, there's editorial comments you can make, and also there's help wanted. Like you can create like, hey, I'm trying to figure this out. I'm trying to write this particular section, but I need help. And you can call that out as well. So just sort of, and then conversely, if you scroll down a little bit, Chris, when you respond to these things, you can also say, look, this is out of scope. Like, thank you for the input, but we're not going to work on this right now. And we're going to table that. The issues don't disappear. We can come back to them in the future. But for the time being, right, we're not going to work on that. It's out of scope, that kind of stuff. So hopefully that's one of the reasons I helped set up this Git thing. And Chris volunteered to be his first document in it. So we're going to really get into the nitty gritty and figure out what individual pieces people want and what the group thinks that should be said in them, as opposed to the broader discussion on the mailing list. And of course, always the primary point of discussion for the work of the group and for consensus calls and for things like adoption of documents will always be done on the list, not here. So anyways, that's my 2 bits, Chris.
Yeah. No, it's a good shout, because yeah, these are I think very useful, and they're used in other working groups as well. Some use it more than others, but yeah, I'd like to make as much use as possible.
Yeah, the Quick guys really have made good use of GitHub. So if anybody's curious, go wander over to find the Quick GitHub, and they've done a really good job of using Git to manage their design process and their features.
Yeah, so now you've had the intro. Yeah, so please get started. So I can also talk about the other ADD requirements draft, which is this one. Unless you wanted to carry on talking more about this.
That was going to be my question. No, I was going to say, what about the other draft?
Yeah, right. So here we go. Do we have any authors on the call? I can't. No. I don't think we do. So this, I see this as pretty useful because there's a lot of text in here that can be copied and pasted directly into this one. And in fact, I've got let me share this.
Tommy suggested pretty much that on the ADD list, didn't he? I think. Chris.
Yes, he did. Which, I mean, it's not just me saying I'm going to copy all this in. Yeah, Tommy Pauly said that. Yeah, he thought that might be a good move as well. So, right. So here is my thought on how we do this. So. In Tommy's draft, there are these sections. So I'm saying from the introduction in that draft, there is text we can merge into the ADD requirements introduction. And then we've got network provision resolvers that maps fairly well into discover resolvers associated with one declared by an attached network. And likewise, that goes to that goes to that. 2.4 is slightly different because the text here seems to map into both the generic 4.1 and the specific 4.13, which is talking about corporate networks. So there'll probably be split there. Then encrypted resolvers goes into walled garden content. Encrypted resolvers of content providers goes into discover a mapping between a public domain and a resolver. Now, what's a little different about this draft is it has section 3. So section 3 considers all these cases and says we can group those. We can group them into 2 types. There are the resolver upgrades and there are the domain-specific resolvers. So, actually, I'm not sharing that, am I? So I just realized I stopped sharing my.
You're sharing your table at the moment.
Yes. Okay. Right. So, do you know in Zoom can you share 2 different applications at the same time?
I don't think you can. I think you have to select what you want to share. So
okay,
it probably means
well, imagine you can see. Tell me, Paul, these draft section 3. It says, I'm paraphrasing, the use cases above can be summarized in 2 categories. Category 1 is resolver upgrade. Category 2 is domain-specific resolvers. And so that, I mean, that is useful because it helps frame the discussion about how do you create solutions to meet these requirements. But what I'm proposing is that is kind of already covered by the fact that this is split into 2 sections. It's split into 3 and it's split into 4. But we may plagiarize some of the text in here and put it into 3 and 4. And then the other new bit that it's useful is privacy and security requirements. So I'm thinking we just take that whole section and put it as a new section in here prior to the requirement summary.
So that would be a new section 5, would it, Chris?
It would, yes. And then requirement summary becomes section 6.
So Chris, would it make sense to fold in that draft I threw together on threats? Is that something we would just fold into this, do you think?
Oh, yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me.
I'm always in favor of having fewer documents rather than more when we're trying to talk about bringing the big picture together.
Right. So my only hesitation is how do we actually do that? So, it's nice and easy to just copy and paste from there to there. Doing the rephrasing that in order to reflect your draft in terms of the level of trust for different networks requires some effort. So maybe that's maybe that's a pull request or an if issue.
Yeah, no, it's probably going to be like some text editing, a pull request of some sort or something. Because I think ultimately, as we work through all of the above topics, there is so what we have today in these lists are sort of operationally like the way we want the DNS discovery to maybe work. But then there's this other set of motivations that we have coming into the discussion on what factors are driving our desire to have those DNS discovery mechanisms work in the following way. And I see the threats and I see the discussion around the adaptive DNS aspects being part of that conversation. And I said because that's, as I've looked through the history of ADD, even before, I think that's what's driven some of the contention there, and that we have a variety of different perspectives on what the priority is. And when those topics come up, that's when an individual today lights up a big, long thread on the mail list and discusses it, but it doesn't get resolved because what we end up with is a person saying, I really hate use of XYZ, and here's why. And then it just sort of sits there.
Yes.
My hope is that folding them in here with this and then bringing them all together in one thing instead of lists and then drafts, is bring them here, is that we can now see them all put together and say, okay, well, you hit XYZ, but are there places where XYZ causes problems with the other pieces that are in here, or the things that enables XYZ enables them? So then we can evaluate whether, okay, I get it, you hate XYZ, but maybe it solves the problem. Or maybe it's a terrible idea, and now we can see it all in context. And so I view this as our context document, if you will, in a lot of ways. It brings all the pieces together. And then ultimately we'll have some pictures, right, Chris?
Yes.
I'm a big pictures guy. I'm a big, Chris and I have talked, and I just love pictures, I love diagrams, because I think they tease out visually these aspects.
They are really helpful. So I think it's before drawing diagrams, I think you need the structure. So unless we get any major changes to the structure, then yes, we could potentially have a diagram for each of these. And yeah, maybe you merge them in some cases, but it will, I'm sure, make it easier to talk about.
So go back, Chris, to Glenn's earlier question about the other document, then potentially that could be merged into the new section 5 to augment the bulk of the text, which will come from the Tommy Pauly document.
Yeah, I mean, this is the section we're talking about merging. So it's not too long. I'm just not entirely clear how it will ultimately look. But yeah, that's for future work.
Yeah, because I guess at the moment the object of the exercise is to corral all of the relevant content into one place.
Yes.
And then see the gaps and contradictions, and then the real work starts.
Yes. I mean, obviously in this, there is a lot of text needed. But that doesn't mean we're starting from scratch. We have a lot of existing drafts we can plagiarize. So hopefully it won't take too long.
Yeah, so if I can make a suggestion, so on that, if somebody reads through this and then discovers that, hey, like right now, section 3.3 is up, so I'll just use that as an example. Hey, section 3.3, there really are some relevant stuff that you really need to consider over in this other draft. That's a really good issue to post. And then and with some detail, right? Because I've also seen some posts which simply says, hey, you need to look at all the stuff this other working group has done. That's not useful. Because it's a little bit too broad, right? But if there's specific references, that's a great example of what would qualify as an issue to put in there. And conversely, if somebody's put something in there, an issue with a that isn't relevant and here's why, and a suggestion, that's also a good issue. They're very focused, they're very, and that's a good place where this will help. And yes. So Chris, I'm going to say that you're interested in having people help author this document.
Definitely.
There's no, I didn't write it, so it doesn't belong here, isms going on with your stuff. And by the way, thank you for pulling this together. So I'm encouraging people, please contribute to Chris's stuff. It'll put you into the ADD Hall of Fame. That's all I got. I have no money to give, so I can offer that up.
And just a note to say, yeah, if you contribute on the GitHub, you will of course need a GitHub account, which is easy. If you want to be able to merge stuff into the code, then Glenn or one of the chairs will need to add you to that.
Yeah, and so let me explain a little bit how this is going to be structured, and especially going forward. Because I looked at the best practices of other IETF working groups, and there's a draft document that Alyssa and I think Paul Hoffman put together on use of ADD, and they looked at some other stuff, best practices as well. So one of the recommendations that we're following is that each document gets its own working draft repository. So this was the draft ADD requirements. For other documents, especially certainly when a document becomes adopted by the working group, we'll create a repository here that the authors can make use of, and the group can make use of it in the same way. So the repository itself will be focused around one document, and then the question of who can do polls on that and who can accept the requests coming in, that will be structured sort of like how we do today with authors, right? So that we're not going to like add 150 people that can all go ahead and edit this thing. The actual editor people, such as Chris and whoever, bubbles up to the system as a heavy contributor editor to the document, listed as an author, should have the ability to also work on this kind of stuff. And you'll have to sort of, like we do today with multiple authors, find a process to make nice that in case you have a rogue author who says, "Oh, we'll let everything in." That's a discussion you just have to have. And as a working group chair, I can also help sometimes that discussion by saying, you need to have this discussion, but you need to work it up amongst yourselves. Ultimately, who gets added is from an admin perspective, that will be controlled by, and Dave, when I get him added, Barry, as you can also see, has ultimate admin privilege. So if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, go talk to Barry, because Barry also has admin privileges over the whole thing as the area director. He's my backup.
Sorry, Glenn. Something else to suggest is maybe drop a note to the list, which should be like a GitHub for Dummies guide as to how people can actually contribute text or do pushes or uploads on the existing documents before they become essentially property of the working group and then the editor's in complete charge of it. I think it'd be good that that information is available so people know how to manipulate stuff that's in the GitHub.
That would be good, Jim. Do you have such a document?
I don't know.
I mean, my understanding is that was sort of what the ITF and GitHub working group was sort of going to produce. I'm still waiting to see that document. It's a good document, and I will say that the basic GitHub stuff, frankly, isn't that hard if you stick to the web version. The editing of document and uploading and creating issues is pretty easy through the web interface. I would be surprised if anybody engaged with the ITF process who can get through the ITF website and get through using XML to write documents wouldn't be able to easily interface through the web version. The more advanced stuff that I've been trying to take care of, and I will take care of for this group, is the admin side of things. And so you don't need to worry about that part of it and getting into those weeds. I'm figuring that out. It's a rough road at times, but I'm trying to do my best.
Yeah, it's just that when you mentioned getting a GitHub account, that's sort of raised a little bit of an alarm bell with me, since some of these shareware things that I've used in the past, it's proved difficult to get an account to use them.
Okay, well, I can send out a very simple, like, here's where you start pointer to the list.
That'd be great, Glenn, thanks.
But if you're looking for somebody to be, hold your hand on the Git journey, I'm not your guy, because I myself am still figuring out pieces.
No, I guess we're on the same boat here, Glenn, but no, a few pointers along the way would I think be helpful, since this is a different way of working.
Yes, it is.
Usually some annoying person at the door.
Yes, it is. I agree. Okay, Jim. Well noted.
And you'll see on the chat, Glenn, that as a vote of confidence in your excellent admin abilities, Daryl has urged you not to get hit by a bus, please.
Oh, okay. I will take that under advisement. I was thinking of doing that this afternoon, but now I'm torn.
And for some of my more paranoid friends, I'll put a link on the chat to the story telling us about the Chinese version of GitHub that's coming soon.
Oh, no.
It will be adopted as standard rule by the ITF.
Oh my.
Well, to be fair, there is GitLab and what is the other? Bitbucket. I mean, there are a bunch of others.
Well, the good news is that with adaptive DNS, China will just be able to direct everyone from GitHub to Git-E.
Seamlessly.
And I'll tell you one thing, I bet you Git-E doesn't use TLS 1.3.
and possibly IPv6, because I seem to remember that GitHub doesn't use IPv6.
Let's not get into that debate right now. Look, the reason why I suggested Chris put this into GitHub, and the reason I'm not I won't say I'm not a huge fan of GitHub, but I'm not against it either. The list is really good, and the list is very powerful, and it's where we will do our private work, as I said. But GitHub does offer the ability to have issues submitted against the proposals, which allows us to track them instead of just putting things on the list. So this way we'll know when a suggestion comes in, and we'll have clear resolution on what we as a group decide to do consensus-wise on those suggestions. And so we'll be able to capture that, which would be very, I think, beneficial to both documenting what we've chosen, but also give us a good historical log of, what was raised and what the decisions on particular points were made, so that we don't keep going back around in circles on the same debate when somebody new joins the conversation or when somebody doesn't get what they wanted. The other additional thing that helps with that is I'm a big diagrams guy. I love diagrams to explain things. I think they communicate much more effectively to people that haven't read the text 50 times. They describe what the text proposes doing. And so as we get these things matured and we can start putting some basic diagrams together, it provides a means for us to share those diagrams because they can be uploaded into the Git repository around the document. And they can say, look, here are documentation and diagrams that we use as a working group in developing of this document. They ultimately won't appear in the document because the document doesn't support, whatever, JPEGs or BMP images or whatever you want to upload. But they might evolve into some form of beautiful IETF line art that is so easy to read and follow and create. Sarcasm off. We keep getting promised, was it vector graphics? We keep getting promised vector graphics. I will be so happy when the IETF has vector graphics as an option for documents. Anyways, so if anybody's wondering why we're doing this and why, it's to help us get to a better conclusion, is why we're doing this. But we're not abandoning the IETF process. So don't anybody put that on the list and say they're abandoning the IETF process. We're not.
Yeah. Well, these are IETF labels, aren't they?
They are IETF labels.
I can't remember where they are documented, but there is one somewhere.
Yeah, I think they may have come out of that draft by Alyssa and Paul, maybe. They refer to a couple other things too. If you go dig up that draft, it's pretty good.
So, Chris, anything else in the draft as it exists that you wanted to highlight?
No, I don't think so. No. Yeah, that's it.
Fair enough. So call to action to everybody else to both read it and then contribute.
Indeed.
Including with 1980s style diagrams and ASCII art to read from the chat.
And if anybody's friends with a few people on Facebook that are from the IETF, there's been a Facebook thread in the IETF group going on about the fact that page numbers have disappeared from RFCs in the new template, apparently. It's caused a lot of people to be very polarized on each side of the discussion, it seems.
Right. Okay. Well, that's just keeping one eye on the time. We have 5 minutes left of our allotted hour. Yes, there's action on all of us to add to what Chris is doing. And in the meantime, just changing the subject seamlessly, is there anything else that anyone wanted to bring up whilst we're gathered together in the last few minutes? Or are you all sort of bookmarking the Chinese GitHub equivalent to go and investigate? Nope, I take silence as not. Well, in which case, thanks everyone for that. I guess we will have to get our reading caps on and get contributing, Chris, to your excellent starting point. So thanks all. Have a great week.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Bye, everyone.
Bye all.
Yeah.